Bruxelles, je t'aime. Tu m'avais manqué, Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime. Tu m'as préféré, Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime.
Hello and welcome to Brussels, my love, our weekly talk show from the heart of Europe. Here we discuss what moves Europe for better or for worse. I'm Stefan Grobe. Thank you for joining us. Coming up this week, Brussels has spoken. The European Commission presented its long-term budget proposal, kicking off tough negotiations over who gets what and who pays for it. Rich countries like Germany and the Netherlands have already rejected the numbers game as being too ambitious. But it's not only about politics. It's about who wins and who loses in crucial areas like technology, agriculture, and climate action. So, what are the benefits for ordinary citizens? And another fight over money. This time it would make smoking in all its forms more expensive. The EU Commission announced the renewed push to curb tobacco consumption through higher taxation. At the same time, the World Health Organization called on countries to raise taxes on tobacco, alcohol, and sugary drinks by 50%. This would save millions of lives and raise $1.4 trillion globally. Can public health be improved by fiscal measures? So, serious questions for our guests this week, and here they are. Dave Keating, Brussels correspondent for France 24, Kate Bolongaro, managing editor for Europe at MLEX, and Tomi Hutanen, executive director at the Wilfried Martens Center. Thanks for joining us here in our studio. But before we get the conversation going, let's take a look at the battle of the budget that is about to commence.
To say that the European Commission's proposal for a long-term budget would not survive in its current form would be an understatement. Within hours of the presentation, Germany rejected the plan, saying the €2 trillion headline figure was way too high at a time when many nations are striving for fiscal consolidation. For Chancellor Friedrich Merz, the EU must do more with the money it has. This sets up a clash with fellow German Christian Democrat Ursula von der Leyen, who believes that rising challenges need an adequate fiscal response. In other words, more money. Get ready for bruising budget battles which might last 2 years. At the end, it will all boil down to this: who's winning and who's losing.
Now, before we get to the winners and losers, let's take a look at the draft budget from a 30,000-foot view. It would be the largest ever seen in the EU's history, and Ursula von der Leyen touted it as larger, smarter, and sharper, and remodeled to the new era we live in. Kate, I want to start with you. What does she mean by that?
Well, I think she's meaning that she's reorganized exactly how the budget is going to be spent. So we've seen some classic items like the Common Agricultural Policy Fund has been moved under a different budget pillar. And they've got these 4 pillars that they're talking about. And there's a lot more emphasis on things that are, we're seeing a lot in the news about defense, security, cybersecurity, technology, innovation, and research. So I think they're really showing what their political priorities are going to be in the next budget round.
Yeah. Tomi, were you surprised when you heard the proposal?
I think what surprised me is that it was framed such a dramatic way. As said, it's very clear. You have the new priorities, which were not there before. Defense, the emphasis on border, competitiveness. On the other hand, you have the old priorities. Agriculture, still very important, discussion about food scarcity, and the regional funds. And then you have, as said, you have the issue that the EU member states are very limited on budget. And then you have the old next generation new payments to be paid on these next 7 years. It would have been a big surprise if it would have been very easy start. As said, now it's 2 years period, and it's going to be tough negotiations. But I think this is just the framing of the open position.
So, Dave, when ordinary folks hear that this is the biggest budget ever, should they be happy about that?
Well, I think partly what needs to be taken into account is, as everyone knows, we have inflation. So the increase looks larger than it actually is. Nonetheless, this is a big increase. And the main reason for that is that there's new flexibility built into this budget because of the lessons that were learned during President von der Leyen's first term. She had all these crises to deal with, the COVID pandemic, the Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And each time those things happened, they needed to invent new funds in order to pay for the COVID recovery, for arming Ukraine. The idea here is that if you make the long-term budget more flexible and have that cash ready to deal with unforeseen circumstances, you don't need to rush to create these ad hoc funds each time you have a crisis. So the main argument for increasing the budget is so that the EU is more ready to deal with inevitable crises that always come up.
Right. So it's the biggest budget ever, but the number of programs has actually been slashed from 52 to 16, with a share of the money completely unallocated, so that the Commission and member states can do what they see fit. That sounds like something Donald Trump could have devised, Kate.
Well, I actually think that it's really clever on Ursula von der Leyen's part to actually try to find a way to make it more flexible. I think they want to be able to have that liquidity in this budget to be able to adapt better than they did. As Dave had said, that this was a challenge for them. They didn't foresee a pandemic. Of course, none of us did. Also the power crisis, the energy crisis that we had a couple of years ago, it's completely changed how they are doing things. So you also see a lot of money in there, for example, for modernizing electricity grids. I mean, we saw the issue in Spain just happen recently, and it's something that a lot of people are concerned about, and it's going to make an impact, I think, on the citizens' pocketbooks when they're able to actually save some money on the power.
And there is the kind of the point of conflict. This first pillar, as you said, there's three pillars. In the first pillar, you have these national programs, and especially Parliament is now very concerned that, first of all, what is the accountability? Accountability on these programs, and secondly, what is the role of the regional actors, how they can contribute to these programs and give their input. And actually, Parliament had already warned before that don't go there. Also, if you have 27 different plans, then the question is, what is the European dimension? What's the big vision, the European plan? And so there will be the discussion, at least in the institutional level.
Yeah. Well, she tries to reduce the dependency on contributions coming from the national governments by creating sort of what we call here in Brussels the own resources, right? Whether this is doable or not politically, but does she have a fair point here? The argument being that we, as a Commission, as EU, we need more flexibility to react to crises as they come up.
I mean, this idea of having EU-level taxation has been enormously controversial, obviously for sovereignty reasons. The traditional argument by many of the EU's member states is that once you start allowing for EU-level taxation, a federal taxation, if you will, then you're taking the EU down to so-called superstate level. But when taxation is only a member state issue, a national issue, it means that a lot of the burden falls on member states in order to fund these types of programs. So what they've tried to do is fudge this. Certainly no one's talking about an EU-level income tax, but what they are talking about are specified, very niche taxes, like the tobacco tax, which we'll talk about in a bit, but also money that comes from carbon trading. That's another way that the EU can get its own resources. And the argument for this is that it's more efficient to be raising these types of taxes, again, not on income and not on people, but on very specific things, so that the EU has this pot of cash that it can use without having to go hat in hand to the national governments.
But what is important that there was already general understanding that when the recovery fund was created, that we need own resources. And now, if you look this debate now, it's very clear that we need some kind of stability. If we always speak about member state contributions, we always end up this, more fluctuating situation. So there is already in principle there is, and Germany actually has exceptionally now already given the green light. Not mention, of course, the level of the budget, but there is already some positive indications.
Exactly. There already was a removal of this taboo, but now we're seeing member states kind of walking back what they agreed to before.
Kate, how big is the appetite in the capitals for a sort of EU tax, whatever it would look like, because it would also mean more power to the European Commission, right?
Well, I think that's the constant battle, is how much power our capital is willing to give up. I mean, I think that to be honest, I'm not so sure there is quite an appetite for, this federal Europe at this state of play right now. I think that we are going to see maybe in the future conversations about this, decades down the road. But I really don't see the capitals at this moment being willing to give up a lot more power for that, unless you're talking about maybe in a defense where they're working together, like the defense fund, and they're able to pool resources again for crisis situations. And we are seeing that again with the energy, the procurement of energy. That's obviously something that they're willing to work together on. But we're going to see more topic by topic things. I don't see, and in the tax world, I think they do still want to be able to keep that competence, as we call it in Brussels, to that sort of power to be able to really set their own tax policy. We've even seen it at the G7 OECD levels, where there's been debates about, the minimum tax for corporations. I mean, the EU can't even get along about that. Yeah. So it's really complicated.
Well, immediately after the Commission's draft budget was presented, criticism rained down from all sides. Not only individual governments and interest groups were dissatisfied with the proposal, but also other EU institutions, such as the Committee of the Regions. What is its argument? We wanted to know from the committee's president, Kata Tütte. Here's what she said. Take a listen.
I understand that this proposal turns cities and regions into pure implementers of cohesion policy. It's a clear centralization. It's a clear top-down model, instead of being active part of designing and implementing the policies. So putting agriculture, migration, border control, cohesion policy into one bag, in one container, it would turn it to a Hunger Games, turning against the farmers, to the mayors, cities, turning against housing, unemployment, and agricultural subsidies.
So a budget turned against farmers, mayors, cities, and various subsidies. This is a pretty harsh judgment.
Well, I guess I think it's 2 points. First of all, this is not just inventing stuff. Actually, this was a little bit the experience when they made the Recovery and Resilience Facility. So that experience now is coming true. And the second point is, of course, if you have national plans and then you have agriculture matching, conflicting with cohesion funds, you have different kind of stabilities in different states, and that fights against the original logic why the common agriculture policy is in the European level.
I mean, one thing I think that's important to point out, and I think the Commission is always very reticent to say this out loud, but I'll say this out loud for them. The reason for taking cohesion funds away from regions is because there's a lot of corruption when the money goes to regional governments, because European countries have very different models when it comes to local governance. You have federal countries like Germany, Austria, Belgium, Spain to an extent, where you have very strong local government, and strong local government tends to be less corrupt. When you have local regional governments in not federal countries, in unitary states like France, like Italy,
Greece.
It is very difficult to keep track of that money when those regional governments don't do much of anything else. And that's always been the fundamental problem with who to give this money to, whether to give it to the national authority or the regional authority, because some regions do a lot, and so in some countries they're just not set up for that. In the end, the Commission kind of caved on this, but it's still a live issue as it's going through here, because you get very different perspectives on this from different countries.
Yeah. Kate, she mentioned a few stakeholders here, farmers among them. She mentions housing and other topics. Are these the big losers of this budget, the farmers to begin with?
Well, I definitely think that this has been a shakeup for farmers. I mean, the Common Agricultural Policy was its own budget item. It has been like this since the beginning. But, we've seen declines in funding over the years. And in this one, they're talking about, reducing it by about, 20 to 22% of the funding that the farmers would receive. And again, the Commission is saying this is a floor, not a ceiling. So they will still receive funding. However, farmers are already protesting. There were protests outside the European Parliament, European Commission. I think there's going to be even more. I was an agriculture reporter during the last budget rounds. And so the farmers are really the people that you want to keep an eye out on during these budget negotiations, because they will have some of the most interesting tactics. And they will also be the ones who are going to be crying the most to the member states. And honestly, they're a very powerful powerful political bloc. They have a lot of say, especially in big countries like France. And France is going to go to the farmers and say, what do you think about this? And so I think that we watch this space when it comes to that, because I'm not so sure that story is really an end.
Yeah, and what has changed is this food security argument with the war in Ukraine. Indeed, the trend was a little bit the discussion that there would be less and less focus on agriculture. Right. But with Ukraine, I think the dynamics have a little bit changed. It's just becoming more challenging, and there's an increasing concern that is Europe able to feed itself.
Right. Now they put together agriculture funds and cohesion funds, lump it together, and then tell the national governments, no, you do what you
figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. You know.
Is that obviously farmers are suspicious. I mean, they're always against political decisions, Dave. But is this something that takes the power of the farmers, takes it down a notch?
Well, I mean, as Kate said, this is a perennial issue here in Brussels that we get these farmers' protests. They don't really like any change to CAP funding, but CAP is one of the most unpopular policies in Europe outside France. And so the Commission has to react to that somehow, because there's a big perception of waste in CAP spending. Perception, I think whether that perception meets the reality is a debate. But certainly when we're looking at the power of the farmers' lobbies, we see time and time again the Commission backs down. Just last year, where there was we had these big agriculture protests here in Brussels, and in the end, the Commission caved by agreeing to water down environmental legislation, which is not even really what the farmers were asking for. It seemed like those protests got a little hijacked by some large corporate interest there, but the Commission was only too ready to back down on the greening of the CAP that had been introduced before. Now they're walking that back. That shows, I think, not only the power of the agricultural lobbies, but also the power within those lobbies of big corporate interests.
Speaking of green, how's climate doing here in this budget? Another loser?
Well, I think there's a big pushback now from NGOs who are saying like biodiversity had its own budget item as well. That's not the case anymore. They talk about horizontal, meaning that they want it across sectors. They want sustainability to be built into development and development of the economy, innovation and research. And so there's a lot of pushback because there was supposed to be an increase in spending on biodiversity in 2026 and 2027. And I think that there's a lot of disappointment from green groups who were hoping that this would be like, a commission that would be pushing forward the Green Deal. Ursula von der Leyen and her team in the last mandate were pushing this forward, saying they were climate champions. And I think a lot of folks in the green space are disappointed to see that, this means that basically it can be kind of sidelined as we've discussed. It kind of makes what exactly is your priority as a government? What are you going to spend that money on? And is it going to be to save, certain species or green spaces, or is it going to be for housing or, job security, food security? I mean, it's a big question.
Yeah, this shift from, before we were talking about ring fencing climate funding. Now we're talking about mainstreaming climate funding. And I can't get a straight answer about what that means. It's supposed to be this horizontal integration of climate policy throughout. But that sounds to me like you just lose it. I mean, ring fencing is a guarantee. Mainstreaming is a concept. So on the whole, I think most people have the impression that this budget has not been kind to green issues.
Yeah, but okay, it also depends a little bit. You have like pure fuels where there's advancement. But I think the whole discussion reflects the general challenge that you have, limited amount of money, and then you have all these new priorities. Especially now, the accent is very much also in the member states in the competitiveness, and also it kind of reflects the new maturity of the European Parliament, which has a little bit different setting now than during last electoral cycle.
Anybody else who's losing?
The climate?
All right, let's talk about the winners.
Who is losing? Somebody, I think it's for many less, there are new elements, and then for many, there's a reduction. I think, but who is really, losing? Of course, again, it's 2 years.
Well, that's actually good news. There are only few losers. But winners. Yes. I've noted Eastern Europe, Ukraine, electricity bill payers, digital technologies and defense, and research and culture.
Exactly.
Did I leave anybody out?
the third pillar, global Europe. I think that's what it exactly means. But that's the new. So it's a good news and bad news. The good news, it's there, and it shows the accent of that EU, especially now with the United States, as we have this situation that the EU needs to take the more stronger role. The challenging news, or maybe the bad news, is that there will be huge battle now in the 2 years, and all will defend agriculture and this and regional fund and all that, and which ends up more easily losing is exactly these global Europe activities. Members, applying member states, future member states are not here in the table defending themselves, and also from those resources you can cut.
What about the most recent mantra that we need to spend more on innovation, competitiveness, etc.? Is this visible in this?
Well, I think Horizon Europe was definitely a winner. Like it was from 95 billion to 175 billion. It's now one of the biggest research funds in the world. It already was. It probably may even already be the biggest at this point, but I think that was huge, that money for research and innovation, and they're going to be able to pour that into, developing digital technologies, artificial intelligence, health. It's really flexible in terms of, where they can spend that money. So I think that's overall good news. And it's good also at this point when the U.S. is rolling back investment and making it a bit of a tougher climate to be conducting research, let's say as openly as you previously could in the past. You could apply for a lot of different types of research. They've limited that now. So this is going to actually make Europe very competitive for academics, for example, or researchers that want to do projects that may not get funding in the U.S. but can come to Europe and do this here.
Yeah, digital technology, artificial intelligence, I think they are well presented in the budget as it stands today.
So in the global arena, is this budget making Europe strong against the Chinese, against the Americans? To
an extent, I think certainly the expansion of Horizon is well timed when you have academics and researchers fleeing the United States, and Europe definitely wants those people to come here and not go to China or elsewhere. I would say that's a good sign for global Europe. Obviously, the investments in defense is a good sign. But at the same time, you have EEAS cutting staff, the EU Foreign Service cutting staff around the world. So there seems to be a little bit of doublespeak going on here when they're talking about global Europe and yet making cuts in that area.
Thanks for this first round. We'll now take a short break and then massive taxes on alcohol, tobacco and soft drinks. Would you accept them to improve public health? Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Brussels, my love. Our guests are still Kate Bolongaro, Tomi Hutanen and Dave Keating. The World Health Organization is sounding the alarm bell. Chronic public health problems are getting out of hand. As a remedy, the WHO is pushing countries to raise the prices of sugary drinks, alcohol and tobacco by 50% over the next 10 years through higher taxes. The move would help cut consumption of the products which contribute to diseases like diabetes and cancer. The WHO is becoming an ally for the European Commission now, which wants to modernize the EU's tobacco taxation directive. A strong signal for public health or just another way to squeeze taxpayers, Dave?
What's interesting here is it has been a long time since the EU has revised its tobacco rules. It was over a decade ago now. I was actually working for the newspaper European Voice and specifically covering this file, and I can tell you it was wild. The specific thing that happened when they revised it is that the users of vapes came out swinging. There was a huge, really legitimately groundswell from the public against adding taxes or restricting.
Just when was that? How many years ago?
2013, I believe.
Okay.
2013 or 2014. And I think in the end, the parliament kind of allowed itself to be intimidated against some of the taxation that they wanted to do on e-cigarettes and some of these novel tobacco products. And now there's a bit of a feeling like we should have gone further on that, because obviously e-cigarettes have become enormously popular now. We see them everywhere. And I think if you're a European lawmaker who was there a decade ago, you're feeling a little guilty because the EU didn't really go after you.
All right. So obviously the 2013, they're trying to raise the taxation here, but they don't succeed. They want to do this in order to bring down consumption of tobacco. And now we have the numbers from the WHO. They say it's getting really out of hand. It's a big risk. And the numbers are quite stunning, right? 1.4 trillion globally. Does that impress anybody here in Europe?
It's now been underlined as a possible own resource, make it guarantees that it will be on the table. And I think the second, if you look the polling and opinion polling and what citizen thinks about this kind of, measure, the taxation is always sensitive. But when you have taxation against cigarettes, all these bad, I think all parents are so happy that there's some, hinders for their kids to buy stuff. But I think the big question will be that who gets the money and of course, these tend to really become own resource and money go to the EU. That's a big, because each member state has to agree.
What's your take?
Well, I agree. I think it really has to be earmarked for health, for example. If you're going to raise money off of this, there's other countries, for example, that they target those taxes to then be earmarked for even quitting smoking programs, so that's financed, so you can get free quitting smoking. But it should be earmarked for public health if you want to really invest in public health. Otherwise, it's just going a bit more into state coffers. And to be honest, it's just going to make some smokers upset at the polls. And so I think obviously there is a desire to get people to smoke less, but they're going to need to find ways to target that money and really make the most use of it if they want it to be successful.
Right. So one stakeholder who's not happy about where all this is going is the European Smoking Tobacco Association, which represents the industry. Now, heading the organization is Peter van der Mark. We spoke to him about the prospect of higher tobacco taxes, and here's what he had to say. Take a listen.
Acting as if taxation at high levels is the one and only solution is fraught with problems. And the most significant problem being illicit trade. We have a lot of internal in the EU illicit manufacturing. If you calculate how many factories they found in the last 3 years, those are more factories than the entire legal supply chain. It gives you a bit of an idea of how far-reaching this is. And if you do not want to recognize this, you are setting yourself up for serious problems.
Yeah, Dave.
This argument is brought up a lot by the tobacco sector. I should point out that the taxation idea here is coming along with new rules. So there's two different packages here that are covering the tobacco. Yeah. And the new rules do set, because this has been asked for by the tobacco industry itself, they have set new rules for traceability of tobacco, particularly cross-border transactions, because, of course, we know we live in a single market in the EU, but cigarettes are much cheaper in certain countries than they are in other countries, just like between U.S. states in the United States. They want to keep track of where cigarettes are moving around in the Union. So they have introduced measures to tackle this. And I will say among the NGOs, the health NGOs, there is a feeling that the tobacco industry always brings up this counterfeiting argument as a way to stop the EU from regulating at all.
Yeah, because the taxation, it helps. It has an impact. The higher prices have an impact. That's the fact. But of course, it's a strong argument. By banning tobacco and you don't want to create new business opportunity for criminals, So, but always argument which is used.
Tobacco is such an important product that as a government you don't want to, shoot it down completely because it is a serious source of income. What's the conundrum here?
Well, I think one of the key things is education. So one of the key ways, for example, I'm from Canada, one of the ways that we've done that is education in schools. And so you start young. So you want to make sure that people actually just never start to smoke. That's the easiest way to do it. And if you put the price point high enough through taxes, that means that they're probably not going to start, because a 14-year-old who cannot get pocket money to go buy it, and you have the age restrictions as well, that all helps. But I think the key is to make sure that young people just never start smoking because they understand the health risks. Of course, it's a juicy tax. It's really juicy to be able to say, oh, yeah, I'm going to get some tax money for that. But I think at the end of the day, for public health costs, it's wiser to find a way to just make sure that people are not smoking to begin with.
Yeah, juicy tax. What about the tax on alcohol and soft drinks then? Is that also something we need exploit more? As
I suspect this idea is going to be less popular because
exactly.
Smokers are a minority in our society, but not everyone drinks alcohol. Most people drink alcohol, and we all have taste in sweets. And so I think actually the backlash towards those other taxes would be more than the tax on tobacco.
Some people are saying that soft drinks and alcohol is more dangerous than cigarettes because it creates all kinds of diseases, diabetes, etc., obesity among children, because they start drinking soft drinks. I don't want to mention any brand now at a very early age.
You can even see that in the labeling argument. Like alcohol has been exempt from labeling for, for example, calories or any of these other things for a long time. They've pushed really hard on that. Red wine producers do not want to have a label on the back saying how many calories is in a glass because, especially women tend to drink more wine and, these lighter drinks and they don't want to.
You know what? I don't want to hear about calories on red wine here as well. Okay, we've come to the end of our second round. As always, you can find the latest on tobacco and the EU's fiscal policy on the various Euronews platforms. For now, many thanks to our guests and to our viewers at home. Stay with us. Welcome to Brussels, my love. I'm Stefan Grobe. My guests are Tomi Hutanen from the Martin Center, Dave Keating from France 24, and Kate Bolongaro from MLEX. The hunt for super cheap online bargains might get a little less attractive, at least in France. The government in Paris has hit Chinese ultra-fast fashion giant Shein with a $40 million fine for what regulators call deceptive commercial practices. It's a major escalation in Europe's scrutiny of the fast fashion model. The blow comes 2 months after the European Commission found Shein guilty of engaging in illegal commercial practices under EU law, following a coordinated investigation with national consumer protection authorities. And earlier this year, France already presented new legislation targeting Shein and its Chinese rival Temu, imposing eco-taxes, advertising bans, and influencer restrictions. So first of all, has anyone here at the table bought something on these platforms yet?
Yes.
Yes, fine.
Okay, well, tell us about your experience then.
Yeah, it's cheap, but not very
cheap and not good.
Yeah, not very good. But young people like them. So.
Kate.
Well, I think that for clothing, it's quite deceptive. There's often lots of memes about the dresses you see and then what you actually receive. I had a similar experience with a particular dress, and it was definitely not the correct sizing. The material was not at all what it was supposed to be. It was awful.
So, all right. So 100% of people who has done that have made a negative experience. The question is, will these anti-platform measures, the anti-Shein Temu measures, will impress the public, the people, the customers who go on these platforms?
I mean, I wonder because there's been a couple of times that I've looked at products on these websites and some other similar ones, and then I don't hit the confirm button at the end because everyone's had bad experiences, and you see these memes, and then I think I'm not going to, whatever I think I'm getting here, I'm probably not going to get. And I just wonder when you think about, reputation and competitive market among consumers, if this is the wide-held perception of these companies, why are people still ordering products?
Yeah,
because I think the real issue is of course it's the selling and commercial practices, but the real political issue is the impact on our clothing industry and what does it do to our companies, and so that's the real
and health, right?
Yes.
So what are the problems with platforms like Shein and Temu, and what are the risks for consumers? Now, to learn more about this, we spoke to Laura Claes, spokesperson of Belgian consumer organization Testachat, which is part of the international network Euro Consumers. Here's what she said. Take a listen.
We see an exponential rise in these kind of low value packages, which is less than 150 euros of value. We come from a few thousand a day for Belgium, and we're now at about 3 million of these low-value packages a day. Clothes and shoes from Shein, cosmetics and toys from Temu. We see a lot of harmful substances. We also see a lot of non-compliance with the EU product safety laws. So these products contain actual risks for consumers. Now we know that the EU is talking about a customs reform, for example, abolishing the 150 euro threshold to pay for a customs fee. They're also talking about a handling fee. This is a good thing because then we can pay for the extra controls that are really needed.
Yeah, so she's touching upon several issues here, Kate. Are the governments finally waking up, national governments and the EU?
Well, I think that definitely this has been a really smart, business strategy on the part of these e-commerce platforms in China, because they found the loophole. If you are able to sell something, well, you pay sometimes nothing for the labor, or otherwise very little for the labor. You don't have to meet the standards of the EU. And then, of course, I think EU consumers, they see the same thing, maybe, on Amazon that's from like a local European company that's met all the standards, and the price is like 3 times higher than it would be on Temu. I think with the cost of living crisis, it's really hard for people to sort of understand that actually this could be toxic. Some of the stuff in here could be toxic. It does not meet, standards that the EU has set. So I think there's a lot of questions there for consumers about what are you willing to give up for the price you're paying. And it's hard when people are struggling in a lot of places around Europe.
Yeah. Right. And so this business model is called fast fashion because these companies operate under at a very fast pace, with some designs going from concept to consumer in under 10 days, with waste and greenhouse gas emissions going through the roof. An interesting number here. Together, Shein and Temu shipped the equivalent of 88 Boeing cargo freighters globally every day. Are we just overwhelmed at this point, and are our authorities overwhelmed with this?
That's exactly the argument that the customs authorities are making here, that they're being overwhelmed by these small packages, which means they could never possibly inspect the number, the proportion that they would need to do to effectively deter the types of product violations that we're seeing. So basically, the loophole is that if you flood the zone with these small packages, the customs authorities are overwhelmed. They're not able to inspect them, and you get away with breaking EU consumer law. That is what the Commission found in its assessment. So the question is about this removing this €150 exemption. I mean, that's essentially the loophole, that they're able to send things in small quantities. But you also are going to need to beef up customs enforcement. That's very clear.
Yeah, I think in 1 year from now we are going to be in different place as it comes to. There has been already discussion and
so I've cited the various examples here and reports. Deceptive techniques designed to encourage purchases, like fake countdown timers, low stock messages. This creates the fear of missing out, right, with the consumer. But these are clear violations of the rules. So why can we just not ban these platforms?
Banning is a harsh measure, but the rules are being enforced. Yeah. That's what happens in France, case in France. But also what is very clever on this, that they are specifically directed towards young people, young children. They go to the website and see, and then they come to say, Daddy, can you buy me this and this and that. But there is an advancement on enforcing those rules, definitely.
Okay.
Well, I don't think they're going to be able to ban them necessarily outrightly, but what they are talking about is this handling fee, for example, that they have to then pay that €2 handling fee that's been discussed. Yeah. There's probably going to be some sort of another tax. This has been a theme for this conversation. And I have a feeling that, we are going to see, maybe a minimum price threshold or ordering, you can implement that. So then they're required to be inspected and meet certain rules in order to be allowed on the EU market.
All right. Great closing words. We've reached the end of Brussels, my love. Thank you to our panel here in the studio and to our viewers at home. If you want to continue the conversation on any topic, write to brusselsmylove@euronews.com or on social media. That's it for today. I'm Stefan Grobe. Have an excellent week. See you soon.